As we know at the moment, a matter which is of great interest is expropriation without compensation. There are three issues that we should consider when we look at expropriation without compensation. The first issue is it a violation of the rule of law? Is it a violation of basic human rights? Is it racist? The second issue, once we've made that conclusion, is what is the impact as far as the Constitution is concerned? And then the third one is, if it is a violation of the rule of law, can we craft legislation in such a limited way that it does not violate the rule of law? I will only look at two of those, because the third question cannot be examined until the proposals are actually presented. So the first question we have to ask is it a violation of the rule of law? And is it a basic human rights, and is it racist? The third part is easy to look at. If we say we're going to expropriate white property without compensation, then clearly it's racist, and therefore it is that aspect has been considered. The second one is it a violation of the rule of law? Now that's a little bit more difficult, because we have to understand what is meant by the rule of law. The rule of law is an English concept which we can trace back to the Magna Carta, and it was taken to its final interpretation when the Americans came out with the Constitution. They were the first country in the modern society to adopt a constitution. In the British system of the rule of law, it meant that the state, the government, in its original, the king, could do nothing other than as authorized by the law, which meant that everybody who lived in a country governed by the rule of law had to fear nothing until such time as the king acted within the law under those. So it became a system which most countries aspired to achieve. In a country which does not have a rule of law, then of course you can violate anything you like. So communist countries, over 110 million people were murdered. In Nazi Germany, over 10 million people were murdered. Rwanda, 900,000 people were murdered. So there's a vast difference in practice in a country with or without the rule of law. Now the real issue that arises is what is the meaning of law? Because the current idea is that if you have a majority in Parliament, you can pass a law which says you take property without expropriation, and therefore you're acting in terms of the law and the rule of law. As we will see, that that's not really true. That is the idea which was presented to the Americans in 1767, when England decided its Parliament was sovereign and therefore it could make any law that it liked. The Americans reacted against it and said, no, people have fundamental inalienable rights, the rights to life, liberty and property, and therefore you could never violate those principles. Now obviously to expropriate property without compensation is to violate the natural right to own property, to enjoy property as such, and therefore expropriation without property is a violation of the rule of law. So, and one of the rights, which are the natural rights, is the right to own property. So it's a basic human right, if you own property, for that not to be interfered with. So we can see that the proposal of expropriation without compensation produces three possible violations. One, the rule of law. Two, basic human right. And three, it's racist. Now why that's important is that those three are included in Section 1 of the Constitution. So if you want to expropriate without property, without compensation, you're going to have to amend Section 1 of the Constitution, which requires 75%. It makes no difference at all. If you did that, you would still be violating the rule of law, human rights, and it would be racist. So under those things, all you'll do is end up with the Constitution losing its legitimacy. You could argue, well, under what circumstances can you expropriate without compensation? Well, that would require a detailed analysis of the third question, which we said we would not look at this particular junction. So we can conclude that it is not at all possible to expropriate property without compensation, without violating the rule of law. And that leads us to the possibility of living in a country which is no longer under the rule of law. And that's a frightening country to live in. That's a country where millions of people can be murdered with impunity. And so the real emphasis should be to uphold and to maintain the rule of law rather than to have expropriation without compensation. Thank you.